Hello again, my name's Kelly and there's not such a big gap between videos this time. I'm here to do the top 10 influential book tag video, which I think was created by Ariel Bissett, and if I'm right then I'll link the original video down below. There seems to be a general rule about this whereby you don't talk too much about the books you list as your top 10 influentials, but I much prefer the videos I've seen where they just say a line or two about each book, so that's what I'm going to do as well. When I first started compiling this list, I realised I was compiling a list of my top 10 favourite books and not just the most influential, and I think sometimes the two are pretty indistinguishable from each other, but I think I've reached a healthy balance now, and they're in no particular order. The first one I'm going to tell you about is The Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. This is the first book in the Seven Waters trilogy, although I didn't really care for the second or third book very much. It's just The Daughter of the Forest that I love the most, and this is what set me off onto my love of fairy tale retellings. It's a retelling of The Seven Swans, which is actually my favourite Grimm's fairy tale, and it's amazing and probably the most romantic book that I've ever read, and the female protagonist goes through a lot and it's beautiful. I need to reread it again soon. The second book I've actually talked quite a lot about recently. It's Lucas by Kevin Brooks, and this one taught me that you don't have to have huge events or epic storytelling to have a really influential book on your hands, because this one is actually a very small microcosm of life on a rainy British island, and you know, there's no fairies or vampires, but somehow there's still magic to it, so that one was influential for me. The third book is called How I Live Now by Meg Rosoff, and I actually met Meg at a talk she was doing in Bristol and rode the train with her from Bristol to Bath. She's a very nice lady. She's actually on my Facebook friends list, and her book taught me that as a writer you don't necessarily have to explain every choice you make or excuse the decisions you take, because there's a lot in How I Live Now that is potentially, you know, unexplained or underdeveloped, but if you write confidently enough, I think for the most part the reader will follow you. And it helps if you have a gorgeous cover too. So yeah, that book taught me maybe to be less hesitant and less defensive about my own writing. Next I have Across the Nightingale Floor by Lian Hearn. I'm not quite sure actually how to say that name, but it's in the information box below. This is book one in the Tales of the Otori, which is kind of a feudal Japanese fantasy story with absolutely epic romance, and the premise is amazing, and also it fed my love of Japan, it inspired me, it's made me want to write my own book set here one day, and this is probably one of the books that would be in my most favourite books of all time list as well. The fifth book is one I read during my first year of A-level, so I would have been about 16 or 17 years old. It's called Regeneration by Pat Barker, and I think it's the first in a trilogy, but this is the one I bonded with because this was my gateway into poetry. This is not a poetry book, it's actually about a veterans hospital called Craig Lockhart during the First World War, but after that book we started to study First World War poetry, and that was really my gateway into poetry reading. So I'll be grateful to this book forevermore, because since reading this I've discovered First World War poetry. I also love Tennyson, so thank you Regeneration. Number 6 is a bit of a cheat because it's actually two trilogies. Number 1 is the Farseer trilogy and number 2 is the Tawny trilogy. They follow on from each other. They're both by Robin Hobb, and they are the best fantasy that I have ever read. They are my favourite books that I have ever read, and I will love them forevermore. Thank you Robin Hobb. Number 7 is the Animals of Farthing Wood books by Colin, Dann, because these are among the first that I can remember reading when I was younger, after I fell in love with the BBC animation based on the same books. I was all about that animation. I collected the magazines. There was like this peel and reuse sticker board with the forest scape, and you could use the different animals. If I still had that, I would still be playing with that. Amazing, amazing. So much love for that series. And I can remember being with my family in Jersey or Guernsey, and my mum, I think, wanted to buy something. Like, we only had a certain amount of money and she wanted to buy something for herself maybe, but I kicked up such a fuss about this hardback omnibus of Colin, Dann that she bought it for me, and when I look back on that I think, oh my god, what a brat, but I really wanted it because I was all about that series. Next I have to include Harry Potter, not even for the enjoyment of its own sake, simply because it shone such a light on the crossover of children's literature into adult reading, and it had such a following of all ages, and I think like from that focus the YA genre rose up. And you know, I wasn't interested in YA when I was younger. I actually had hearing problems as a child, so it took me a very long time to learn to read, and then when I finally did learn to read, I skipped all the kids stuff, so it wasn't until I was at university that I started reading the kids stuff. But this one made it okay to read children's fiction or YA at an older age, and also it made everyone want to write it, so that's maybe a good and a bad thing, but Harry Potter, we are grateful. Number 9 is another that I read at school, but I only remembered quite recently. It's called Throwaways by Ian Strachan, and there's a sequel called Wastelanders, which I also loved. And this book, or these two books, kind of taught me at quite a young age that children's literature and childhood in general is not some perfect, sacred, safe haven of happy endings and puppies for Christmas. Bad things can happen to children too in our world, in the real world. And it made me both slightly like fearful that something bad might happen to me, but also very grateful that I was so blessed. Lastly, and again these are in no particular order, for number 10 I've chosen The Shell House by Linda Newberry. Linda Newberry is not an author I ever hear spoken about on YouTube, but she is wonderful and I really recommend her. And this book in particular, it fed into my, at the time, growing interest in sexuality in children's and young adult literature, which I think was born from my love of Japanese manga, because those relationships are often more ambiguous. And this one too follows quite a young character discovering his sexuality, and it's also just an incredibly well written book and a wonderful plot. I need to read that again actually. Those are my top 10 most influential books. If any of them tie in with yours, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to have a chat with you about them, especially like some of the older ones like Throwaways and Animals of Farthing Wood. Does anyone remember Animals of Farthing Wood? I keep waiting for them to release it on DVD and they never do, and who the hell has a VHS player anymore? So tragic. Bye!